I never asked Britain to go to war with China over Hong Kong. Most Hong Kong people accept we're Chinese. But Britain has run Hong Kong for 1.5 centuries. And when she had to depart, you would have thought that Britain would discharge her moral responsibility by A, setting up democratic institutions so we can have elected members of the Executive Council and of the Legislative Council. And then hopefully then the Chief Executive of the Hong Kong SAR would also be democratically elected by the people. And then, actually, in 1997, at the time, there were more than 3 million British citizens living in Hong Kong. But we are third-class citizens because we have no right of a vote in the UK. And Britain only decided to have this scheme called BNSS, British Nationality Selection Scheme, and that was only introduced after the Beijing massacre in 1989, when there was this brain drain. People were very frightened and they fled to other countries to get right of a vote in Canada and America and in Australia. Then Britain introduced this scheme, but it's only for 250,000 people. And who are the people who would be qualified? These are the people who have this extra right to vote in this disgraceful functional constituencies. So meaning these are the well-educated, well-heeled, and the wealthy. So those are the people that would be selected under the scheme. And the rest, what have they got? They got a passport called British National Overseas Passport, BNO. And what does that stand for? Britain says no. Well, we are almost 13 years after the handover. And some Hong Kong people still feel very bitter about the British betrayal. But anyway, we look forward. We have to. And we hope Hong Kong will have democracy. Soon, I hope. I always say, we should have had democracy yesterday. And I introduced a bill for a fully directly elected Legislative Council in 1994, when Governor Chris Patten was here. He also had a bill. His bill provided for a drop of democracy. Mine was for a fully directly elected council. Of course, the pro-Beijing camp tried to sabotage Chris Patten's scheme. In the end, after a lot of lobbying, many arms were broken. Chris Patten won by 1 vote. Very, very narrow margin. And my bill was also defeated by 1 vote. Well, I will continue to try. And the fact that we have 1 country, 2 systems means that I try to struggle for democracy, to help the human rights lawyers in China. I'm still at liberty. I'm not yet arrested. I remember Sir Murray MacLehose, who was governor in Hong Kong for 10 years. After he retired in the early 80s, he was elevated to the House of Lords. He came to visit us in Hong Kong in the mid-90s. He and I just don't get on at all, because he kept talking about how to make China feel at ease with us, how we ingratiate ourselves with Beijing. And I said, why do we keep talking about a country that we can do nothing about? Instead, we should be talking about a country that we can do something about. And this country is called Britain. So later, Sir Murray told me a story. He said, he's a great friend of Beijing. He said, recently he was taken on a visit to Beijing or to China, and they took him around to visit various places. And of all places, they took him to visit a prison. He said the conditions were very bad because most prisoners were thrown in and then nobody would hear about you again unless if you're lucky enough that you end up on the list of the US president. Then he may mention you once or twice a year. So he said, the prisoners really hopeless in there. So the only thing that the prisoners look forward to is to have a visitor. And if the prisoner is very lucky, the visitor may even bring some cigarettes. He then turned and looked at me and said, Emily, in future, when you are in prison, I will come and visit you, and I will bring you some cigarettes. I said, thank you very much, Lord MacLehose, but I do not smoke. And this is coming to me from a member of the House of Lords.
Just one simple question.
Simple question.
So when you're talking about self-censorship, do you think there is some defunction of the one country, two system? Do you think it is somehow of self-restraint by Hong Kong people, or in fact it is some kind of conspiracy of like indirect control from Beijing, which leads to such the situation nowadays in Hong Kong?
Well, self-censorship is, of course, not censorship by the government. The people decide to do it themselves, but in the news media, it's not done by journalists. It's mainly by the news proprietor or by the editor, senior people who would tell the journalists what to write and what not to write. And censorship by the business people, by the professional people, by the people at the universities, is mainly stemmed from the fact that they do not want to upset China, because if they do upset China, they will reap a lot of awful consequences. Like they could be banned, like me, could not be allowed to travel, because many people travel to mainland China. So the last thing they want is to be banned. So out of fear of being banned or being punished in other ways. And of course, there are many people who do business. They make money. Some make a lot of money. So if they upset Beijing, if they upset the authorities in the mainland, then there may be problems for them. So it's really out of self-interest. They think that if I don't upset the people in power, then my money-making ventures will not be adversely affected.